Hello, everyone. I hope I'm centered. Well, welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. If you are not familiar with this program, let me tell you what this program is about. This is the program where we talk real talk about things that are happening in education, employment, mental health, physical health, finance, divorce, social services, or anything else that is steamy. So we like to take those kitchen table conversations and we like to put it all out there in the open, all for the purpose of your education. And we here at A Step Ahead Tutoring Services, we believe that all of our life stories are a tool of education. So, with that said, I am excited about this episode, and I know I say that in every episode, but I am particularly excited about this episode because not only is it a repeat topic, but I guess that's it. It's a repeat topic, and this topic is a super duper repeat. And I'm going to tell you what that is. So, the name of this episode is Living with a Disability Part 12. So, this is exciting because this is the only topic so far that has the most parts in this series. And we here like to repeat topics because we believe that there is multiple ways to view a single topic. So I'm excited because we're doing it again, right? We are at part 12. Check out our video library for parts 1 through 11. Bringing it back, y'all. We're bringing it back. And today I have a guest who is going to sit on the hot seat. He's going to take that fire and he is ready to um, talk to you guys. So I'm excited. Let's get right to it. So, my guest, I hope I'm saying his name right, is Shane Trapp. And I'm going to tell you about who he is. So, let me do that for you right now. So, who is Shane Trapp? Let me tell you who he is. So, Shane Trapp is a certified life and relationship coach with a specialization in ADHD and ethical non monogamy. He founded Creating Order from Chaos Coaching to help people dealing with life's chaos to discover their own order. For 15 years, he has used his servant based leadership to help hundreds of people find their way through life's chaotic turmoil. He uses that experience to help clients discover their passions, develop goals, create lasting habits, and learning accountability. Fabulous. All right, so let's get right to it. I'm going to bring Shane to the stage right now. Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. And just so it it works, it's Shane Thrapp.
Rap.
It,
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
it is 100% okay. It happens all of the time.
All right. So there you have it. All right. So, Mr. Thrapp. So today is Living with a Disability Part 12. We are here to discuss your disability. So I am going to hand you the baton and I'm going to let you go ahead and tell your story.
Um, well, thank you for having me on. Again, I'm Shane Thrapp. I help people with ADHD kind of develop the skills that they need to um, find their way through this world that doesn't really understand people who have ADHD or who are neurodivergent. I wanted to have a way to give back to the world, and I needed to have a job where I ran things on my own because I don't work well with others who are above me. I do better as a kind of a leadership role, and I've always been that kind of guide. I've always been a kind of a a servant-based leader. I always want to give people the resources to achieve their goals and find their passions and build habits that allow them to be successful and thrive in the environment that they really want to be in. I specifically work with clients who deal with ADHD because it's been something that I've studied for years and years. I was diagnosed late in life, 34 years old, and my oldest son was diagnosed when he was 10, and I wanted to know how to help him. And the more I learned about ADHD so that I could support him, the more I was like, I feel like I may have this. And I had just recently met this amazing woman who's a special needs teacher. And, she was like, pretty sure you do. And so, I went to try to actually find a psychiatrist and talk to them about it and get diagnosed. But I kept getting told that I had depression, or I was bipolar, or I was dealing with all these other mental illnesses. And that's the biggest issue with ADHD, is that it's so often misdiagnosed as these other illnesses. What ADHD is, it's a complex brain neurotype. Our brains are different. The structure is different. There's either a dopamine deficiency where we don't produce enough dopamine, or our brain absorbs it too quickly and we're not able to process it correctly. We know that it impacts about 11% of children, 5% of adults, but that number is likely very much lower because, like in my situation, it's most often not misdiagnosed into other illnesses, which are most often comorbidities from ADHD and the lives that we lead dealing with this disability. It's a developmental impairment of our frontal precortex. It affects our executive functions, impulse control issues, emotional dysregulations. It messes with our focusing, and it creates issues for us for being organized and being able to maintain a normal style of life, that is kind of like the status quo of our society. And while it is considered a disability by the American Disability Association, it's more akin to just being a neurotype, similar to being on the autism spectrum. It is not autism spectrum, but it is similar to it. So because our brains are different, and our society just isn't really built to be accepting of these differences. And so there's a lot of issues that come from that. The stigmas of having ADHD causes a lot of different traumas to happen in our childhoods and into adulthoods, where we develop sensitivity to rejection, and we develop a thing called imposter syndrome, because we feel things more. Right, our emotions are very strong. They're very passionate. They're very focused when we have them. And when people criticize us and when people reject us for who we are, it causes a lot of trauma to happen to us. And so we wind up with these comorbidities like depression, anxieties, PTSD, especially if we deal with complex abuse. Physical, mental, emotional abuse from parental figures or peers. Again, since we feel things more, the emotional dysregulation causes these abuses to become complex trauma. And if we are never diagnosed, or if we're never treated for the ADHD, then those issues get worse and worse and worse as we get older. And sometimes it's mitigated by having a job where we are able to use our strengths to our biggest advantages. But as we get older, we start getting into jobs where we start stagnating or not using our strengths as much as we were, or we retire. Those symptoms get worse, and we, at that point, we start to fall into this really, really negative mindset. And that's kind of where I come in. As an ADHD life coach, I work with clients who are 35 to 55, 60 years old, who are dealing with this new, lifestyle that's kind of like starting to decline due to all the symptoms that they're going through and all the things that they're having to process, and not having the education and not having the information available to them. I kind of step in and kind of help guide them through this process. I help them find psychiatrists. I help them find therapists. Working with a psychiatrist and therapists are able to start processing what they're going through. And then with me, they start learning how to build habits, find their goals, discover their purposes, and learn about accountability and how to maintain that accountability, working with friends, family, and peers in the communities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Excuse me. So can you get more into what ADHD looks like for you in terms of behaviors, thoughts, things that you do, things like that? What does ADHD look like for you?
So ADHD for me, I have ADHD combined. There's two types of ADHD. There's hyperactive and there's inattentive. When you have combined, you have a combination of the two. For me, I'm very forgetful. I have a lot of different tics. I'm also on the autism spectrum. I have a hard time sitting still sometimes, so you'll see me kind of twitch and things of that nature. You can't tell right now, but my legs are shaking, and my fingers are kind of tapping together. These are kind of stemming techniques to kind of help me process and cope with like anxiety and things like that I go through whenever I'm on camera. I also got a wicked sense of humor, so yay. For me, like I said, it's memory issues. I sometimes have issues with interrupting people. So like maintaining and keeping friends and things of that nature. Whenever it's out of sight, out of mind is a big problem for me. So whenever I'm not directly dealing with a person or directly dealing with a thing, I don't really think about it. And so that kind of applies to emotions, that kind of applies to memories, that kind of applies to people and the things that I deal with on a regular basis. And so that's kind of what I have to deal with all the time. And so, yeah, that's kind of what it looks like for me. My impulses kind of go nuts whenever it comes to money. So, I have to make sure I have coping mechanisms for that.
So the previous people I've spoke to about ADHD, who I guess coincidentally, they were all women. So you're my first male guest talking about ADHD. There appears to be a difference in how it appears within the genders. So women with ADHD tend to be more inattentive, as opposed to men, they tend to be more hyperactive. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Yes, I can. Primarily, so ADHD is essentially ADHD. That's what it breaks down to. The differences between men and women are the presentation of how they express their ADHD symptoms. Because women have different difficulties in our society, they have to process things differently, and by having to process things differently, they have to deal with what that looks like in their life, and that's what causes them to present having more inattentive. Men happen to have hyperactive styles because when we process things differently, we have a higher likelihood of anger, and our negative, aggressive emotions tend to lash out. Whereas women deal with rejection or sensitivity dysphoria by kind of withdrawing away from situations. Now, again, this is primarily a clinical difference because, everybody processes ADHD the way that they do based on their lifestyle. And so you'll see a lot of men, you'll see a few men who deal with inattentive ADHD, and you'll see a few women who deal with hyperactive ADHD. And, but clinically speaking, we see it, largely women deal with inattentive and largely men deal with hyperactive. But it's more our outward expression of our symptoms more so than an actual difference in ADHD between the two genders.
Mhm. Awesome. All right. So, as I asked my previous guests, I asked them about their how they were during school, how things were growing up, in the homes and the schools, living with ADHD. So I'll ask you the same question: how was school for you?
School for me was both interesting and hell on earth. Uh, I grew up in the South in the 80s and 90s, or late 80s or 90s, and I grew up in a household where my dad was extremely abusive, emotionally and physically abusive towards me, emotionally and mentally abusive towards my mom. My mom was a part of a fundamental religious Southern Pentecostal church, which was essentially a cult. And I had my first exorcism when I was 11. And that was a pretty bad situation for me. And I started masking very early on because I realized that I was weird. My dad would tell me I was the smartest dumb kid he knew, and my friends, the people I hung out with, the peers, would find that I would interrupt them whenever they were trying to talk about things, or I would bring up subjects that really weren't related to things. And as I started learning more about social niceties, I started trying to fit in. And so that meant I masked a lot. And masking is a coping technique where you try to emulate the behaviors of those around you. So you kind of pick and choose these different features of who you see as normal around you, and then as you emulate those, you try to fit into a social situation. And the problem with that is not those masks aren't always perfect, and so they come off as kind of you being very fake or even more weird. Think of like I'm using this as um, the you see the uncanny valley. You see an android and they are talking to you and you feel very uncomfortable because they're very human-like, but they're not quite human. And so that's kind of what masking looks like to some people. They're almost normal, but not quite. There's still something that's off about them. And that causes these red flags to pop off for people. As far as education wise, I was super smart in most subjects. I could read at a level that frankly astonished most of my teachers. At sixth grade, I was reading college level textbooks. I could finish an entire world history textbook within a week or so. I could go through the entire English textbook in about a week and a half, just depending on how interesting the stuff was. And that's kind of what I did. I read whatever the syllabus was. I read everything that was involved in it, and then I slept through most of my classes because I knew everything, and I had somewhat of an eidetic memory when it came to these subjects. The biggest difficulty I had was in math. You can't really read ahead of that stuff, and my brain doesn't process math like normal people do. Now I can do basic math, adding, subtracting, dividing, multiplying, stuff like that. But whenever it comes to geometry or algebra or pre-calculus, calculus, physics, math, I can't really do that stuff. However, when it comes to actually learning theory, like biological theory, chemistry theory, physics theory, when it comes to that kind of stuff, my brain can just retain it with no problem. When it comes to behaviors, psychology, things of that nature, anything that I'm really interested in, my brain can retain it. But when it comes to things I'm not interested in, I couldn't tell you anything about anything. And so that's kind of how my brain worked through school. And then, uh, you know, once I got out of school and I started trying to go to college, I tried to do online stuff, and I found that I really couldn't connect online through the courses. I couldn't keep my focus on them, and I really struggled in college, and so I wound up dropping out of college twice. And so, everything from that point on became self-taught and self-learning and self-research, and I've probably got 10,000 hours of reading about ADHD and other psychology subjects and physics and history and political theory and all the various things that my brain has decided to hyper focus on over the course of 20 years now. So, yeah, my brain is full of weirdly specific trivia.
All right, so you just said a lot there.
I'm sorry.
Where that's all right, but let's unpack that. So going back to your family life, your home life. So is it safe for me to assume that your family looked at your disorder as demonic, as not from this earth?
Um, well, my dad wasn't a religious person unless my mom had left him. Um, my my mom really didn't look at it that way. My gram didn't either. But there was a point in that. I guess I'll tell this story. When I was in church one day, I was 11 years old, and my pastor was one of those fire and brimstone Southern preachers who used a microphone and a speaker system at a church that's not bigger than your average house. And so he was talking about Noah's Ark, and for me, that story always struck as very cruel, because here's these millions and millions of people who, are being essentially drowned for whatever it was that God had deemed them not worthy of living for. And I happened to choose a point where he had paused to kind of get the congregation to kind of do the amen, hallelujah part of the story. And at that point, I had kind of leaned up and asked my gram, why is God such an asshole? So here I am in this midst of the silence asking this question, and he heard me. I wasn't too far from the front. And so he comes down the aisle, he grabs me in my arm, he drags me up, he calls the elders to the front of the church. So I now have these, 12 old white dudes all standing around me, like essentially splashing holy oil and screaming, in tongues around me, trying to cast the demon out of me. And so that kind of garnered me a reputation for being odd and weird. And since we lived in a very small community, that story kind of got around to a lot of different people. And so some of my friends' parents were like, "Oh, he's a demon child," and And again, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD. Like, nobody believed in mental health in the 80s and 90s. Like, that's not a thing we dealt with. You were either normal or you were a little touched. And so, and even my teachers really didn't understand me at all, and so that was kind of like what I grew up in, like that kind of environment. It was difficult, and there's a lot of trauma that I had to unpack with therapy and things of that nature.
Thank you for sharing. So, bringing it back to school, so it sounds like you had an affinity for the reading, humanities, things like that, but math is where you struggled. Um, so you mentioned that you dropped out of college twice. So now there's disability services, and now there's all these there's all what am I trying to say? There's all these techniques and tools that's now given to college students with disabilities. Would you ever, knowing that all this stuff is out there, would you ever go back to college?
I'm 40 years old. No, I wouldn't. Mainly because I've already learned the techniques and things like that that I need, and I've also learned how to learn the things I want to learn. And I don't I don't have the driving need to have that degree anymore because I don't I don't feel like wasting my time going through school learning things that I'm legitimately never going to use or need, right? I'm never going to use calculus. I'm never going to need to have any of this mathematics. I'm never going to need, a large chunk of the extraneous subjects that you have to learn to get at your associates and much less your bachelor's degree. Like, I don't need that stuff. And I'm a kinesthetic learner. I learn best by interacting with a classroom or interacting with people directly, or having or viewing or watching a video or listening to a podcast and then talking to people about it. And I learn better with like peer to peer conversations. And online learning really doesn't have that as a feature for a large number of the schools. And the schools that it does have that in, those schools are $60,000 or $75,000 for a bachelor's degree. And I don't have that kind of funds to waste on something like that. Now, going to a school in person and going through that, again, it falls back into there's a lot of the subjects that I just don't need or want. And at 40 years old, I don't feel like wasting my time with it. I will learn the things I want to learn when I want to learn them, how I learn them best.
And you learn it best by real life interactions.
Mm-hmm. I learn it best like what we're doing right now, talking about a particular subject or talking about a specific thing and just kind of going with the back and forth, especially with somebody who's really knowledgeable about a subject.
I mean, in a way, you can do that with online school. There are schools online. You'll have, depending on the school, they may just give you the things to read and you just read on your own and answer questions. Or there's actually a professor teaching a group class. So you may get more of what you're looking for in an online setting as opposed to an in-person setting. Does that help you at all?
And no, because those schools you pay more for that feature, right? And again, my finances don't let me put down $65,000 for to get a degree again, and then falling back into what I said before. There's a lot of subjects that I don't care about and don't need in my life. I don't need, and as an ADHD life coach and as a project manager and as the various hats that I wear underneath the umbrella for my business, I don't need a degree for that stuff. I've got enough life experience. I've got enough learning, and I've got enough peer support to be able to do pretty much all the things that I desire to do.
Not even financial aid or a payment plan?
Financial aid simply means a loan, and I don't need any more student loan debt.
All right. So you're a life coach. So tell me about the types of clients that you see. Tell me the demographics of the clients that you see.
I tend to work primarily with men between the ages of 35 to 55. I have worked with some women, and not because I don't want to or anything like that. It's just you kind of coach who you know, and the clients kind of look for people that they connect with the most, and so you know. and life coaching is predominantly a woman-led profession. 65 to 70% of life coaches are women, and so my niche is primarily men between 35 to 55.
And is there any things that stick out at you? Any commonalities? Any of the issues that come up? Like, what's the most occurring issue that comes up for your clients?
The most occurring issue that my clients deal with as they get older, even if they were diagnosed at a younger age or um, and had kind of developed coping mechanisms and things like that, they got into and if they weren't diagnosed, they got into working fields where they were able to use their strengths and they were able to maintain and process and deal with and cope with all the different symptoms from ADHD. But as they get older into the 30 to 35-year-old range, and they kind of get into these more sedentary roles, their symptoms start getting worse and worse. And then as they get closer to retirement age, their lives are essentially just like destroying themselves. Their relationships with their spouses are deteriorating at faster rates. Their spouses don't understand why the relationship has changed as dramatically as it has. Their spouses don't understand why they can't remember things when they should be remembering them. They don't know why they're not um, um, able to maintain relationships with their friends. They don't understand why they're not able to maintain jobs that they used to be able to maintain. And as these symptoms get worse and worse, they start finding out about ADHD at around age 35. And if they've never been diagnosed before, they've kind of lived this entire life where everybody around them has really treated them as a failure because they don't know that they have ADHD. And so they get those common judgments put against them. They're not dependable. They're lazy. They don't remember anything. They're not consistent. They go from job to job. They go from relationship to relationship. They bounce from home to home. They rack up huge amounts of debt. They wind up in prison. They wind up on abusing drugs and alcohol, and then they find themselves finally discovering about ADHD and getting tested with a psychiatrist and finding out that all of their life it's been because that they had ADHD. And the recurring theme from that is since they've had all this time dealing with all these people, treating them the way that they have, all this trauma that they're having to process, they develop a thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is a pervasive feeling of rejection from somebody and an explosive reaction to that rejection, even if it's a perceived rejection and not an actual rejection. And so you'll see commonalities from this would be a person being criticized at work and then exploding at work. Another thing that we see online is a person on a dating website where they go to try to talk to a person and that person says, I'm not really a good fit for you. And then you see them getting worse and more abusive within the chat. That's an example of where you may see a rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Another thing is called imposter syndrome, where any success that we've had or developed, or it doesn't matter what it is, because we've been told by so many people that we're a failure or that we are never going to measure up to our potential or that we're never going to be good enough, we don't ever think that our actual success is ours. We think it's a fluke of luck. We think that we fell into the position. We feel that we aren't as successful as we really are. We feel like we're a fraud to the people around us, that they really don't think that they don't know how much we're fucking up. And these are comorbidities along with ADHD. Along the way, we also develop depression, anxiety. If we have dealt with abuse, we develop PTSD at an easier rate. And so that's kind of like the overarching theme and of the clients that I deal with the most.
All right, so let's get to the $65 million question. what's what's the answer? What's the cure? What's the treatment? How do you deal with all this?
So the first thing to do is to get seen by a psychiatrist and to get diagnosed officially with ADHD. That involves multiple testing. Within a clinical setting, they're going to kind of put you through a few questionnaires to kind of determine how you react to certain situations, how your memory works, how you. They look at your family history, they look at your mental health history, and then they kind of go from there. And you get the diagnosis for ADHD. From there, there's medications that you can take. There's non-stimulant medications such as Strattera and other medications like Vyvanse and stuff like that. But there's also, of course, the well-known stimulant version medications like Adderall, Ritalin, and different types of amphetamines like that. These allow our brains to produce and maintain the levels of dopamine that we need to function at a regular level, at a societally acceptable level, so that we're able to kind of maintain our friendships, maintain our relationships, maintain our work habits, and things of that nature. But we can't just stop there. Medication only solves part of the problem. The next thing that we need therapy, and we need to be working through with a therapist on how to process our emotions, how to process stress, because stress is what causes our rejection sensitivity dysphoria to get worse and worse until we explode at somebody, because we're internalizing so much of this stress into us. It's like essentially piling dynamite on top of dynamite until somebody says something that we perceive as a rejection or a criticism, and we explode out. So we have to learn how to process those emotions so that the emotional dysregulation side of ADHD doesn't build up on us and we explode. We need to also learn the coping mechanisms for how to learn self-affirmations, how to learn how to talk about ourselves, talk to ourselves positively. And we also have to learn how to learn to trust the people around us, especially if we have a history of PTSD and abusive trauma from people essentially betraying our trust or hurting us or causing us pain or abusing us in marriages and things of that nature. Because again, we feel things more. And so even if a spouse is critical but not meaning to be really negative about it, that criticism keeps piling up on us. And since we don't know how to regulate our emotions like other people do, we wind up blowing up, and that causes our relationships to fail around us. And that includes work. So if we have a really critical boss and they keep piling that criticism on us and we don't perceive it the correct way, then eventually we'll blow up and we'll lose the job, or we'll have to find a new job somewhere else. And so that's where a therapist kind of steps in and says, all right, let's learn to process these emotions. Let's learn what your triggers are. Let's learn how to self-advocate and talk to the people around you so that they understand how not to trigger you, or what to do if you are triggered, how to help you cope, or to let you have your space and not pile things on top of you. The next step is is an ADHD life coach. An ADHD life coach comes in and helps you build habits, create and learn how to do a self-discovery process so that you understand yourself better. It kind of works hand in hand with what the therapist is trying to teach you as far as understanding your feelings, but you then also need to understand what motivates you. The what, where, and why of what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and where you work best at. An ADHD life coach comes in and says, okay, all right, let's figure out who you are. And then we can go from there to learn more about how to create relationships that are healthy, how to set boundaries in place, how to understand how to communicate effectively with those around you with what you're dealing with. And this is kind of that part of that disability side of things. How do you communicate those disability issues with your boss and learn the accommodations that you need from your boss? How do you learn to communicate those issues with your spouse and communicate them to them and get accommodations from them so that they're able to help you with things? How do you communicate these things to your kids? How do you communicate these things to your friends and family so that these people who may be abusing you without knowing it either stop and try to understand you, or your boundary is set in place that they may not need to be a part of your life. And that involves anybody who's in your life that will not or chooses not to understand what you're going through and how you're dealing with things.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different things that people with ADHD can do, from, for those who need medication, or who prefer medication, there's that route. Then you have, people who are reluctant to take medication, there's more of the behavioral therapy part. But whichever route that people take, you still recommend the psychotherapy part.
If you choose to not take medication, or if you're in a situation like me where you're medication resistant, therapy is absolutely necessary, because, if you, and I'll use myself as an example here, I can't take a lot of the medications. Adderall spikes my anxiety really high. I am on an amphetamine, but it's an extended release, so it allows me to kind of process throughout the day instead of those spikes. And it took me a long time to get to that point, because I had to go through all these different medications. And there's a cocktail that you kind of have to find that's kind of the sweet spot, because our brains are all different, and our dopamine production is all different, and how we process emotions are all different, and how we deal with our impulses are all different. And so medication is kind of a process that you have to go through. And I suggest that everybody should try medication. Again, if you choose not to, that's your responsibility, and that's on to you. If you're medication resistant like I am, then that's kind of what you have to deal with. But therapy is absolutely integral to that. And if you're not on medication, then working with an ADHD life coach is even more important, because you have to learn the skills so that you can manage your life effectively, so that you're able to make up for what your brain doesn't naturally do. And that can be tools, learning how to use Google Calendar effectively, how to make sure you're learning how to journal effectively, how to create task lists and maintain them, and creating accountability buddies, or doing a body doubling system where you're working with people around you to kind of help you stay on task and focused. There's all these different tools that you have to learn, and each system needs to be kind of custom tailored for the person that's going through it. You can't do a 5-step process to heal from ADHD. You have to learn your own particular style and needs, and then build a system that works the best for you. And that's why a therapist is so important, and that's why an ADHD life coach is so important, is because you have to have the help, because we aren't reflective people naturally. We're not able to be very objective about ourselves. And so we need that outside input and outside perspective to kind of help us gauge what is actually true, and what is a good coping mechanism, because our brains lie to us all the time. Our brains constantly tell us that this person's being very critical of us, that this person's judging us, that this person's a danger. Our brains always tell us that we're not good enough, and that we aren't qualified to do a thing, or we're not, or we're actually failures, and there's no reason for these people to actually look up to us. And so we need that outside input to be able to learn how to self-affirm, how to speak positively to ourselves, so that we're able to put rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, imposter syndrome, and put those on the back burner, and not let them influence us as much as they do.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for that. All right, it's time to wind things down. So do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share?
My catchphrase is, it's okay to live a life that others don't understand. Our society really doesn't get neurodivergent people. They don't understand people with ADHD. They don't understand people who are on the autism spectrum. And our society needs a mindset change And the only way we can do that is if we start speaking out and advocating for ourselves and explaining to people what we go through and what we deal with. And that's kind of what we need to start working on together. And we need to be learning from our therapists and learning from coaches and learning from these amazing influencers out there in the world, on how to talk about our disabilities.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for that. Thank you for all of your great insights. So let me put up your banner right now. All right, you guys. So Shane Thrapp, all of his contact information is scrolling below at the bottom of your screen. So I encourage you to follow him. Follow him on, he is almost everywhere on social media. So I encourage you to follow him. He's on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. So he's everywhere. Um, you can also email him. It's also there as well. I don't think I put up your website. Do you have a website?
Yeah, I'm super easy to find. If you Google creating order from chaos, you'll find me. But the website is www.creatingorderfromchaos.com.
Okay, let me just put that in there before I forget. Okay, so on the web. Okay, and what is it?
www.creatingorderfromchaos.com.
Creating order from chaos with the K or a C?
CHAOS. My brain stopped.
.com. Okay, I think I got it. All right, let's put it up there now. No, wait, that's not it. There it is. Okay. All right, so I just put that web address for you. So go to his website, learn more about his business, learn more about him, follow him on all of his social media, stay in touch with him. Do you want to talk about your business a little bit?
Yeah, I am. I help run one of the largest men's ADHD support groups on Facebook. I am taking clients currently. I've got a pretty decent availability for the next few months, and if you're dealing with ADHD or you're dealing with relationship issues, hit me up and let me know, because I do a free discovery session to see if it's a good fit for me. And you're not taking any chances on me. If it's not a good fit, I know people who can help you, and if it is a good fit, I can help you.
All right, there you have it. So, ADHD life coach, if you're looking for one, if you need one, hit him up, Shane Thrapp. All of his information is at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you who are watching this on our YouTube channel, all of this information will be in the description. All right, Shane, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on. I really had a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna place you backstage now. Wait, that's you. Okay, there I am. All right, you guys, and now it is just you and I. All right, you guys, we have reached the conclusion of our episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. Whether you are watching this on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, it's on our website as well. Please check us, wherever you're watching this, check out our platforms for more videos and clips, and don't forget to follow us. And while you're at it, let us know what you thought about this episode by leaving a comment in the comment section below or in the comment thread. Gabrielle, would love to hear your feedback. And as a reminder, this web series is a production of A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So if you would like to learn more about our company, the things that we have to offer, or if you're looking for tutoring services for yourself or for your children or for anyone that you care about, look us up. Our information is at the bottom of your screen, but I will say our website. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. And there is a special promotion going on right now. If you mention Hot Topics, we will give you 15% off 6 hours of tutoring. That's right. So when you reach out to us, however you contact us, and you say, hey, I heard about you from Hot Topics, boom, 15% off coupon. So I definitely encourage you to take advantage of that. And I also encourage you to sign up for our email and texting list. You will receive even more special discounts, promotions, and awesome announcements. So I encourage you to sign up for our email and texting lists. That information is also at the bottom of your screen. All right, so I'm just going to share this final message before we officially close.
Hey there, have you heard of us? We're a small team of tutors here at A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. We believe that education and information should be accessible to everyone, regardless of income, race, or creed. We're dedicated to making this happen, but we need your help. Please consider making a donation to our company. No amount is too small. Your donation will allow us tutors to remain employed, offer free and low-cost services, put on productions like this web series, and reach out to families nationwide. With your help, we can tackle the academic challenges of our students and the emotional, mental, and behavioral changes that result from these challenges. As a bonus, we can improve our communities in the process. Support us today. Note: we're a for-profit company. We're not a charity. Your donation may not be tax deductible. Please consult a tax professional.
All right, you guys, thank you for watching. That's it for our episode. I will see you at the next episode. Now, I am signing off.